live, everybody. Hello and welcome to CB Chat. I'm Chad Blair, an editor. Oh, I promoted myself.
Yes, editor.
I was thinking of editor John Temple, my good friend, and the man I went to work for 4 years ago this week, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
John is in town visiting us, and before we get to him, I want to say, first of all, a special hello to Patricia Blair, my mom. I know she's out there, and I hope you're doing well. If you want to ask questions of John, you can do so on our hashtag CBChat. Is that right? CBChat, or you can actually ask the questions right on the screen, the story that you're looking at right now. So let us know what you want to know about John Temple. John, as you may remember, is the founding editor of Civil Beat. He's the former publisher and editor of the Rocky Mountain News, former managing editor at the Washington Post. And today, I believe you're at the Knight Fellows Journalism Program?
Today I'm a senior fellow at Stanford, which just means I'm old, and they give me a nice place to work there.
Oh, terrific. And John is wearing a Civil Beat t-shirt as well.
I am.
We're very proud about that. So, John, I wonder if you might first tell us about what you're going to say at the Society of Professional Journalism conference, which I think
you want me to give it away?
Just give us a little tease,
Well, first I have to say how nice it is to be here with you, and to be here at Civil Beat and be in this office with all these. It's amazing to see how much it's grown. So it's really great. I was just delighted to be asked by SPJ, which is a regional convention in California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and a number of other locations. And the theme of the conference is what they're calling, I think, waves of change. And I guess what I'm going to talk about is the need to not fear failure, because we're in an era of experimentation. And if you think that the only way to succeed is to never fail, you're not going to succeed. I mean, we as you know, when we started at Civil Beat, it was difficult for many of us because we would test things and then do something differently because we learned that something worked or didn't work.
Which can be hard for some people who are used to things in a certain structure and don't change things, but you're absolutely right. If it didn't work, we were willing to put it aside and try something new.
It was really an important part of my experience here at Civil Beat, was learning to work like that and to have the trust we had among ourselves that it was okay.
Yeah.
You know, we would try something and it wasn't like your head was on the line because, only when you gave me a hard time.
Which was never happened at all. Things went smoothly every day here at Civil Beat.
Well, I think you were probably the only person just better at technology than me, so we never had
I didn't use Twitter. I didn't use Facebook. I didn't have an iPhone before I started working here. So
that's right.
My skill set completely transformed because of you, John.
No. So I'm going to talk about change and how I see sort of journalism evolving and some of the things I've learned. I've really been lucky. I feel very privileged to have been able to spend time in Silicon Valley and sort of connect journalism with sort of the technological revolution. And it's really an unbelievable place. It's filled with optimism and people who believe that they can change the world and do new things, and of course they've proven right in many respects. And so I'll try to connect those things. And
well, you mentioned the words optimism and trying to do new things and make the world a better place. I was surprised to see in this new report out by Pew today the words optimism and energy and excitement about what's happening in journalism. The last few years, the last decade, as we know, has been a real rough one, but there's a sense, at least from the Pew report, and I want you to comment on this, that we're on this turning point. There seems to be new hope that journalism is not only surviving, but maybe even thriving, but in a whole new area.
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, I mean, Civil Beat is connected to that in the sense that one of the major trends that's giving people a sense of optimism is that individuals, wealthy individuals, passionate about either the country, the culture, politics, and the importance of journalism, are stepping into the journalism world and trying to reshape it for a modern era. And so I think we're moving from a sort of corporate professional managers just trying to manage sort of the profit flow from these very valuable or once valuable newspapers like the Tribune Company, to individuals, whether it's the people at BuzzFeed or it's Pierre Omidyar, the founder of Civil Beat, who's now started First Look. But there's Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, it bought the Washington Post. And I think one thing that's giving people a sense of optimism is that these outside investors are coming in and saying, you know what, this is important, we're going to work on it.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it going to depend on wealthy people like the head of Amazon and Pierre, our founder, to make this happen? What about the idea that people will still pay for journalism online? I teach students at the University of Hawaii, and they seem to think if it's online, it's free, and I don't have to pay for that. Is this the model going forward, or is it sustainable as a business model online?
I think it has to be sustainable as a business model, and there's no way that the idea that just because people are rich that they can funnel money into journalism, that is not a viable future. But perhaps as a transitional future, because they're builders or they want to make things, they can move. They have a fresh way of thinking about it, we hope, or at least that's in part happening. As it relates to paying for journalism, I mean, I'm actually involved in an experiment called Laud, which is a different way of paying. But if you think about Civil Beat, we started by that very fundamental premise. Can you produce something of value that people will pay for? And we started here actually with a hard paywall, as I recall. And I mean, and then we learned how to tweak it and to experiment with how users would respond to a paywall or to the idea of paying. And then and what I'm working on now is in a way a continuation of that, in the sense that I do think, and I think we're seeing that there's going to be some dimension of people paying to support the things they value. Slate came out this week and said that it's going to explore like some kind of membership or some kind of model. So I think I don't think we're done with this idea of paying for news. How it happens, I don't think that's decided.
You know, on the flip side of that, for the journalists that are producing the content, David Carr had an article in the New York Times this week about metrics, about how organizations like the Oregonian, very well respected paper, actually finding out how many people look at the article, read it, and then paying that reporter accordingly. And the downside being, if they're not reading your stuff, you're not going to be paid as much, and maybe you're not going to be asked back. Civil Beat, of course, has its own level of metrics. I wonder if you might be able to comment on that.
Well, it's a really interesting case, and just to step back, the Oregonian's part of a company, Advanced Communications, which is owned by the Newhouse family, which actually owns the New Yorker, and it's a very wealthy, privately held company.
Pacific Business News here in town.
Oh, they own. That's right. So, I think they've made a fundamental decision, which is that they have to become a digital company to have a future, and I wouldn't say they're the best about communicating about it, or in fact, I don't think they've done a good job of that. But they have made an important fundamental decision. David Carr raises issues, are you basically putting reporters in the hamster cage, just driving? But I look at it a little bit differently, and this is actually something I'm going to talk about at my talk at SPJ in Hawaii. In part, if you think about what's the purpose of what we do as journalists, it's not just because we're sitting here and we're lucky enough to be able to go interview important people or interesting people. It's actually, deep in the DNA of journalism is we want to make this a better place. We actually want, I think people here at Civil Beat care about Hawaii. I know you do.
Yeah.
You have.
That's why I'm here.
Right. You have a deep passion for it. So then you go, okay, what's the best storytelling mechanisms for engaging people and causing, prompting change? And you can argue, historically, newspapers could do, for example, the 5-part series with, and I did a lot of these, so I know them, 5,000 words a day and multiple pages, but who has time to read that? Right. And one thing we experimented with here at Civil Beat, without ever having sort of the hard quota thing, was get engaged with the audience in real time, get engaged with the community in real time, and talk about the work you're doing and the experiences you're having along the way. So when people say, at the Oregonian, they're saying, you have to file something, post something to the web 3 times a day. As you know, that's not really very much.
No.
if you're really in a web culture. And so when I hear somebody complaining 3 times a day, I'm like, but it's just not. It's not really that much. And of course, if it's just like a lockstep rule, well, that's one thing. That's crazy. But if it's a direction and where you're saying, you know what, you live in this space, and your readers live in this space, and connect with them and talk about. Remember when I remember at Civil Beat when I went to the police station the first time to meet with them, and it was just a joke. I mean, they sat us in a room. They wouldn't let us into the police station, and they sat us on kindergarten type chairs for family meetings. It was really just it was almost kind of ridiculous. Right? And I wrote a piece about Fortress HPD, right? And kind of got into it with them, and it's a different type of journalism. And I think what the Oregonian looked at in the best light is saying is, by the way, I don't go onto the airplane or into the bus state or onto the bus or standing at the bus stop or anywhere without seeing everybody having their face in a screen, right? And they're living in real time with you. So talk about it.
One of the things I wonder that is a risk that might be something, a negative side of relying on metrics and measuring how many eyeballs are going to the page. Is there then also a temptation, not only from the editors but from the business side, to write more stories that are going to draw people in? The extreme example would be, let's have more kitten videos on the website versus hard-hitting corruption 5-part series that take a lot of time and commitment.
So I think you're going to a really fundamental issue, which is that there's some journalism that is not going to maybe ever attract as big an audience as Gwyneth Paltrow getting divorced.
Yes.
I mean,
just separated.
Separated,
actually,
sorry.
For now, but stay tuned.
I'm not an expert in this area, as Chad knows. So I think we may have to have different funding and support mechanisms for different types of journalism. And there's no question, there's a worry that the serious topics, take science, take the environment.
Yes.
I mean, the New York Times does, they do a terrific job on the environment. They killed their environment blog. Well, I don't know all the reasons, but one might be that its traffic wasn't probably as good as a blog about the New York Jets or another, or the Yankees, that kind of thing. So there's clearly these dangers, but I do think about our society and sort of an open society as there are some self-correcting aspects. Like one, we have a nonprofit sector. So you're seeing nonprofit organizations. Like I'm more familiar with Colorado, Hawaii, California. You see these nonprofit entities stepping into providing information in a way that can be really valuable. And then you see like BuzzFeed, which is the kittens, right? Is the kittens website.
Huffington Post Hawaii a little bit on that.
I hope so.
Thank you, Huffington
beaches.
Post Hawaii, by the way.
Huffington Post Hawaii is beaches, and I think there's all kinds of stuff. I enjoy Huffington Post Hawaii, and I'm delighted that it's. I think it's really cool that Hawaii has its own Huffington Post, because this is such a unique place, and it can bring it to the world in a way that Civil Beat, if you think, Civil Beat is for local people, what's referred to here as locals. Huffington Post Hawaii can serve a much larger audience and bring some of.
And they have.
Yeah.
They've generously posted some of our stories, and that's a real treat to have people from all over the world be able to read what we're producing here in Hawaii and take an interest in it.
And I think Hawaii has a lot to offer the rest of the world. So, but if you go back to BuzzFeed, BuzzFeed is actually hiring investigative reporters with real pedigree, and they're really trying to move into foreign reporting. So they're going from sort of the kittens to serious, and others are going the other way to have this broad spectrum that responds to reader interest. And you're absolutely right. If the Oregonian becomes kittens, it's going to die. I think one thing
we'll see. The kitten audience out there,
true,
John,
is unlimited.
Do not
that's
underestimate.
True. I'm not, as a friend recently told me here in Hawaii, I'm not a pet person.
Let me ask you, do you think long-form journalism can survive? Initially, there was, I think, a pressure on the web to make it short, to keep it short, that people's eyeballs aren't going to be able to stay on the screen that long. You're not going to be able to read a New Yorker link or an Atlantic Monthly link article. But it seems to me, particularly with the improvements of the screen resolution, that there's more room for that. And then, of course, that would lend itself to these longer, deeper pieces. Do you see that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the BuzzFeed example is another example. They've basically said there is a place for long form. People will read it on a smartphone. They definitely will read, and the interfaces are so nice today. If you think about Flipboard, it's a beautiful reading experience. I mean, it's really a pleasant reading experience. And you go something like that, you go, it's very difficult for a publisher to match that. And I think if you look at, there's a website in San Francisco called Medium. Medium was developed by the person who created Blogger, sort of one of the original blogging software tools, and that Google owns now. And then he was one of the team that created Twitter. And his third incarnation of a publishing platform is a thing called Medium. Very, very sophisticated. I'm going to talk about it here in Hawaii, in part because I think it addresses a really fascinating question, which is they allow the reader to engage, or they encourage the reader to engage the journalist during the writing of a piece. So somebody as famous as Walter Isaacson, former editor of Time magazine, author of the Steve Jobs biography, Walter Isaacson is publishing chapters of his new book on Medium and asking readers to help him make it better and more accurate. So it's a fundamental journalistic purpose, accuracy, right? And here's a guy of that stature putting his work out there and saying, I'm going to publish it in a year. Well, looks to me like he's already published it, right? It's sitting there. And then he gets feedback, and the feedback is visible. So, like, you as a reader can actually see other people telling him that, you know, you're slightly wrong about this.
Complete transparency and accountability.
Yeah. Now there's some control and curation. Like, he gets to decide which comments become visible, but the comments become visible at the point in the story where they're relevant. So let's say, like, remember when I worked here, like, you were often telling me, giving me a background on Hawaii to make sure that I understood what was going on. Well, instead of doing it at the end of the story, if we were working together, you would do it right at the location, like, John, like, you know, this you need to know this nuance related to this word or this way of thinking, and that would help the reader and create side channels that that could connect to the story. And this is one of the examples of why I think when they say, oh, posting 3 times a day is such such an unrealistic expectation. Well, not if you're saying that the reader might actually be able to contribute. Like, I read Ian Lynn's column today about
charities and the Department of Education.
The Department of Education the idea of exempting them from
state ethics code.
State ethics code. I'm like, it's like, what is all the legislature here just basically exempt us from any rule? That's what we.
They have that power.
You know, and just imagine the kind of conversation you could have conceivably, appropriately curated. And I know that's what you're trying to do here at Civil Beat, and I think that's a direction that I believe has long-term merits for credibility and for quality. Because, I mean, here's Walter Isaacson saying, I can produce a better book if you tell me where I'm off before I publish it.
You're listening and watching and viewing CB Chat, the hashtag on Twitter, CB for Chad Blair or Civil Beat Chat. I know it's a coincidental C. Never knew that, did you?
That's why we hired you. We went around the island looking for somebody with the initials
Who
CB.
could it be? Chad Blair. And then you can also chime in at the bottom of this screen with any questions that you might have for John. I want to ask you about your time at Civil Beat and then talk a little bit about the Washington Post.
Sure.
You spent the first 2.5 years or so. You were there from the beginning. You've made it. You created it on your own with the help of Pierre and Andy Ching and everybody else.
All of you.
And now you've been away for 2 years. What do you see when you look in? What kind of changes, evolvement, if that is a word, have we evolved? Evolution, that's the word.
Yes.
What do you remember and what do you see now?
Well, see, I mean, one of the things before we began the chat, I was asking you about the culture we sort of established. And, I mean, I think one thing that's really incredible is I remember sitting in this room in the first days of in April of 2010,
That's right.
And the reporters, and we called you reporter hosts at the time to emphasize this idea of engagement with the audience, with the public. calling, and it would take 10 minutes to explain what was Civil Beat.
What? You're with who?
Right.
Pierre who?
It was just a nightmare. And remember how...
Oh, it took forever.
It was like slogging through mud to get to the point where a normal reporter just calls and says, I'm blah, blah, blah.
We're an online news service in Kaimuki.
Yeah. Online?
But now, I mean, that changed during your tenure. It was Civil Beat. Oh, and you're Mike Levine or Adrian LaFrance,
right.
and they were taking our calls, and suddenly it took a little while.
It took work.
We became a credible, respected, a competitor, really, to the Star Advertiser.
Well, and in
others.
part because of partnerships, and it's been, I was really glad to be able to work with Hawaii Public Radio,
Correct.
which I think is a really important.
We still are.
I'm going to go on the radio actually on
with Friday.
Yeah, I'm going to go on the conversation on Friday just for good old time's sake and to see her, and I'm looking forward to that.
KITV, we're still continuing.
KITV, the partnership with KITV, the partnership with Rick Hamada.
Yep, we're still on.
The use of public opinion research. I mean, the using of polls, but also I think for me to see the addition of Huffington Post and the idea of sort of opening it out and sort of bringing in more people, and then the idea of a legal clinic being established, a First Amendment-oriented legal clinic, separate from Civil Beat, but clearly reflecting the spirit of Civil Beat,
which won its first lawsuit, as a matter of fact.
Right. And you look at that and you go, early on there were real questions, and I think they were fair. What's the commitment to Civil Beat, and is Civil Beat going to be part of the Hawaii landscape? And I think that question has been answered. I mean, I look at it coming to Hawaii, and I go, I mean, the Huffington Post it's the second largest news site in I believe after the Daily Mail in London or something like that. I mean, anyway, it's huge. Much larger than the New York Times, for example, or the Washington Post. And when I look at the legal clinic and I look at the expansion you've seen here, where you have a world-class photojournalist,
P.F. Bentley, who used to work with Walter Isaacson at Time Magazine, as a matter of fact, and boy, does he have a few stories there too.
And you look and you look around the room and you say there's a level of seriousness and expertise developing in the room. So
okay.
I'm really I'm really thrilled. And by the way, on the mainland, when I go to things, people know about Civil Beat.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that is very cool. So what was it like to leave sunny Hawaii? You and Judith lived down there near Kaimana Beach,
gosh.
And then to go to Washington D.C. and work at the Washington Post, still a print paper, legendary newspaper.
Yeah.
What kind of transition was that for you?
Well, it was an unbelievable transition. Let's just say that you're not wearing slippers when you go to work at the Washington Post. Although I did a good job of rarely wearing a tie or a jacket, although I kept a tie and a jacket hung on my door. Sally Quinn used to say that when I came in, I walked, with the lightness of Hawaii, but after about 5 months, I was like carrying the burden of the world on my shoulders. It was a very difficult, a couple of things. It is people were very welcoming and very gracious, and it's a place filled with unbelievably talented people. It was so much fun to work with the caliber of people.
Oh, I bet.
There's just terrific people there. And people treated me great, and it was a tremendous amount of work because I not only had to learn the people and the institution, but I also had to try to work to move us forward. And I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic. But you can see with the sale after I left that it was also a very difficult time for the news organization as it grappled with what is it in this era. And and the editor who hired me, he lost his job.
Right.
A really great editor came in, Marty Barron. I think the world of Marty. He's a really strong journalist. But there was a lot of transition at the time, and it was obviously wrestling with what would that organization become. I mean, one thing I admire. There's a couple of things I really admired. One is the Post is great about internships, and I look here and I look at Aaliyah and I think how wonderful it is. Aaliyah Wong was an intern.
Twice. We had her, I think, for 2 summers.
Was it twice? I think.
Was it? Yeah.
Was it twice?
Yeah.
But I was so happy that Aaliyah,
our wages are very good. What are you doing this summer?
That'd be good.
Come on back,
good intern. I could just walk around and talk to people and tell stories on
slippers.
Civil Beat. I like that idea, actually. I'm very happy here.
But the internship program
the programs at the Post is amazing. It's very competitive, and they do a great job of identifying really talented young people and giving them an opportunity and bringing them in, and it really stimulates the organization. And many of the people there started there because they rose in this very competitive and supportive internship environment. So I thought that was great. And the other thing that they do that's really interesting is I loved the respect that people who've left the Post, and many have because there were many buyouts.
Sure.
And of course people go on to different opportunities. There's a real place of affection for the Post in everybody's heart. And in many cases, I worked for the editor Marcus Broccoli, but Marcus would consult with somebody, ask Len Downey, the previous editor, for counsel or help. And in fact, on election night 2012, when we were all in the newsroom, Len Downey was calling the races. So he was brought back into the newsroom. And I love an organization that maintains those relationships and has that kind of respect where you leave and things could be difficult, and I feel that way about. I mean, there's things I would do differently than the Post does them, and all. But it's a place with terrific people, and I love the way they keep those relationships.
Terrific. We got time for just a couple more questions with John Temple, but I wanted to say Cindy from McKinley High School says she appreciates Civil Beat and our partnership with the schools and educating students. Great. And we have a question from Richard Abbott to John. Do you believe Twitter killed Boys on the Bus? I don't even know.
Does everybody know that Boys on the Bus? I mean, are you referring to the book about what was the book about presidential election coverage?
Oh, the old school.
The people who were on the
Theodore,
bus were sort of in a bubble.
Yeah.
Boys on the Bus was written by somebody other than Theodore White.
Right.
Well, essentially, yes and no. Twitter did kill Boys on the Bus in the sense that the idea that anything can be held internally or controlled, that's not possible today. Yeah. And frankly, we know that private individuals can have this huge impact on election coverage because they can witness things and share them. And politicians are very aware that a camera is essentially always on them today.
Or they should be aware if they're not.
And that wasn't the case, right? It wasn't the case. So, but I mean, I view Twitter as a positive for news. And there's an interesting study, and actually I'm going to talk about this in SPJ, is that how much more quickly you would learn from Twitter, for example. The case they used was the explosion in Harlem where a building collapsed and a number of people were killed. They could confirm that that was a real event on Twitter within like about 90 seconds, 120 seconds. And it took, I think it was 11 or 15 minutes till the first news report, and it was just very minimal. So Twitter was, 3 or 4 times as fast, and they knew it was accurate because of the aggregation of tweets from a geographic location, providing similar perspectives that then a computer could tell that something was actually happening in that zone. And so I think Twitter's super important for news.
What about when the news is wrong? I'm thinking about the Boston Marathon bombing and identifying the wrong people. I don't think Twitter was. I don't know that it was.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame Twitter. I think that was.
AP was no. I don't want to.
No, I don't want to.
But it was a respected news organization.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so that always goes to the fundamental question of do you want to be first or do you want to be right?
Right.
And I think if you say you want to be first and you're willing to give up being right, I just think that's a mistake. I mean, I just don't see how you can be, obviously there are times, it's not a black and white thing where you can never say, well, I'm not going to write about some things that I may not know all the details. It's one thing to say, to go beyond what you know, but if I knew that an explosion occurred on 128th Street, or that there was an incident on 128th Street, restrict yourself to what you know. It's still valuable to people, and you can still be first. It just may be, you may not be first with the detail of who the suspect is.
And then you can add it later. You can write through it. Good advice for all journalists. Mike Webb has a question. I guess Len Downey didn't vote. And what Mike's asking about, does it really interfere with impartiality? Should journalists, I think Jim Lehrer of all people doesn't vote in presidential elections, so he can somehow be independent. But what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I personally, that's, Len is an amazing journalist, and I have a lot of respect for him. So, but I think it goes too far. I mean, I'm a citizen. I believe in the secrecy of the ballot box, and I believe in people judging the fairness of coverage. And as you know, there were lots of people who disagreed with the coverage decisions that I made or we made here at Civil Beat.
Still do.
Yeah, that's good. If they all agreed with us, that's not the way the world should work.
We told them that, but
I think I would never ask a journalist to give up the right to vote. Where I do agree is that I don't believe journalists should have bumper stickers, campaign signs on their lawn, donate to campaigns. They should do nothing publicly that would suggest that they would unable to raise questions about their ability to be fair. Obviously, if you look at their work and you don't think it's fair, well, you're free to judge that,
That's right.
But that's based on their work. But if I were a candidate, I wouldn't really like it if a guy showed up at my house with signs supporting the other guy and said, I want to do a story about you. I'm like, why am I going to talk to you?
So my last question for you is really two-part. What are you doing at Stanford, and what's next for John Temple?
Well, I just got offered an internship at Civil Beat this summer.
We have free food and water.
And I'm hoping that Patty is going to give me one of those really nice laptops.
I'll put in a good word, John.
And maybe a smartphone. And then I could spend the summer telling stories on the, because there are so many great stories here. This is just, I love Oahu, and I'm always amazed by the complexity of the place. And okay, so that's one thing I'm going to do this summer, if Patty will live up to your promise to me.
We'll even let you have a desk.
Maybe I could sit on the couch.
Oh, no, not the couch.
Honestly, I don't know. What I'm doing at Stanford is, one thing that I found was really difficult at the Washington Post was that the newspaper, the print newspaper, still so dominates the thinking of the newsroom in a time where I believe the smartphone has completely transformed the way we experience the world, actually. And that the smartphone, one thing that I've really enjoyed at Stanford is the way people there look at the smartphone. Essentially is like a second brain. That's how they see it, as a second brain, and they see it where. So who's going to control the data? And who's going to is it going to be Facebook and Google, or is it going to be you? Are you going to have tools that you could do things with your own data to make your brain work better for you? Or is it going to be them doing it for you? So I know that sounds esoteric, but basically I'm working with computer scientists, largely in the mobile area, to try to understand and try to think through what should news look like, and what should a news organization be like if you said, by the way, the newspaper didn't exist, the rate, it's like, this is what I live on. This is the world I live in. I'm on Facebook in it, I'm taking pictures with it, I'm listening to music with it, I'm watching TV with it. So what should those news reports look like? So I'm working with computer scientists. I'm actually working on a number of projects, and I'm working with other fellows. I'm really lucky to be with 20 super talented, really smart people working on their own projects, and I try to be available to them and the staff to talk about journalistic issues and things like that. In terms of what's next, I was over in the North Shore and I really enjoyed it. No, I am.
You don't strike me as the surfer type,
I'm
John.
not. I'm not. I am. Look, I love journalism. I'm going to stay doing. The question will be whether I work with one organization or work with. I might stay as sort of an independent person who has relationships with lots of different organizations and helps them in different ways. Something that I'm sort of doing now, and I might continue to do.
Okay. Well, it's been a real treat to welcome John Temple back to the newsroom that he founded 4 years ago. And I should know. Yeah, we did. And it's just been a real treat. And I'm looking forward to seeing you and Judith later this week when we celebrate the 4th anniversary. I want to thank you for all coming in and listening and viewing and watching CB Chat. I'm Chad Blair with Honolulu Civil Beat. Aloha and have a happy and safe Prince Kuhio Day.